Well, Joe, I appreciate your comment. And it's about 42 cents out of every dollar right now is borrowed. 47% of the debt of this country is owned by China. We do have to be addressing this. I'm going to go back, actually, to the budget proposal that we put forward. Made no claim. I voted for it. Made no claim, though, that it was perfect. But it was a starting point. We have to have dialogue because the very issue, Joe, that you point out, when we're looking at $14.3 trillion in debt in this country, this is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. In fact, both parties, Republican and Democrat, they can take credit for running up that debt. Both are guilty of it. Amen. I wasn't there to help create the problem, but I am there to try and help fix the problem. And the way that we're going to do it is by having dialogue. Let's push the Senate to take up that budget. Rather than waiting 855 days, I believe it is now, to address what is going to be very important to this country, let's put it on the table. Let's discuss it. If you don't like that option, let's revisit, cut cap and balance. Let's take that up. It passed with bipartisan support. Let's discuss it. Out of the House of Representatives, we passed legislation. And you're probably getting tired of hearing it, but you could probably continue to hear it over the course of the next year and a half. We are one half of one-third of the government right now. We cannot deal in isolation. We need to make sure that the President and the Senate are willing to work with us and put ideas on the table. Put an actual idea on the table. Don't give us the generalities. Give us the specifics. Let's sit down and talk about it. I'm willing to. Let me give you an example of where we can work together. Democrats and Republicans. Ed Perlmutter, member of Congress out of Colorado, Democrat. He and I are co-sponsoring legislation called Capital Access to Main Street, the CAMS Act. Because again, it goes back to one of the previous questions in regards to how are we going to get the economy moving and what are we going to do? Well, part of it is access to capital. And I wrote his name down. I'll tell you, I want to tell you his name's Jim Bartness. A few of you in this community may know him. I just visited with him last week. Small contractor, paving company. Called up, had to put his equipment on the line and sell it. And when I visited with Jim Bartness last week, I come from a construction family. Get some people that are pretty tough, they've dealt with some tough circumstances in the past. He said, Scott, the toughest meeting that I have had is when I called in my 24 core employees and told them this was our last day, and his voice broke. He was not able to keep his business going because he did not have access to capital. Jim told me his story. He paid down in the construction business, and a lot of I see business people here, and I know you know what I'm talking about, a line of credit. We all have seasons of our business. When we do a little more, it's a little less, you get a line of credit at the bank to be able to make the payroll, to be able to keep your people employed, to be able to make an investment in your business, to be able to keep it growing and hopefully grow it and add more folks to be able to work with you. Well, Jim had paid down his line of credit to zero. Went to the bank, and it wasn't that they couldn't increase his line of credit. They couldn't re-up it because of regulations. Dodd-Frank, two fellows that we can thank an awful lot for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac wrote the rules to now try and correct the problem they created, have closed off access to capital in America. Because under the bank regulations as they exist, you have a one-year window, one-year snapshot of what the business is. And when they're getting ready to review your loan, they look at it, and under bank regulations, you have to show an ability to repay. Well, in the construction business, every now and then you do run out of work. You continue to bid. You need that backlog. And he could have kept that business going, but he needed to make those equipment payments. He needed to continue to pay the people that he was working with to be able to get work. Well, he couldn't get that line of credit because on his P&L, on his profit and loss statement, it was showing that he wasn't having income because he hit one of those slow periods notorious for construction. Well, the bill that Congressman Perlmutter and I, a Democrat and a Republican, have jointly put in, some of you may have seen it, even Fox News thought that was great, had us on their business channel. Because what we're going to do is to allow a 7-year amortization of those business loans so that the banks can make that determination if you're worthy of credit. You still have to show the promise. You still have to show that ability to be able to operate your business. But rather than a 1-year window, we're going to extend that to 7 years to give banks the opportunity to be able to fulfill that line of credit. Well, had that bill been law, Pueblo may have not lost one more business. 24 families in Pueblo may have still had a job. As Jim Barton has related to me, this doesn't even include the subcontractors and others that relied on the success of his business. So this is an opportunity for us when we're talking about the regulations, to be able to work together, to be able to address these issues. Those opportunities are there. But again, not to overstate the point, this is out of the House of Representatives. We're still waiting on our senators to act.
All right, ticket number 785. Seven, 751. 751. 739.
My name is Gordon, and I look around and I see what seems to be just a lot of crazy things that come to us from Washington. The border issues, it seems like our government does not support the Border Patrol people and what they're doing. Anwar sits there, we've got all this oil and nobody is allowed to drill it. What do you see as being maybe the top 1 or 2 or 3 greatest dangers to this country that you as a congressman can address that would protect us?
You know, the top issues for me are about jobs, getting people back to work. I don't think it can be overstated. I have friends right now that are unemployed. Friends that have lost their businesses. This is about jobs in this country. Getting our economy moving in this country is absolutely essential. And this is something that Congress can truly impact. You know, we're spending right now, when we talk about regulations and the impact that that has on jobs in this country, we're spending $1,750 billion a year in regulatory requirements. I think we need to address that. Now, some people will want to take that to the extreme. And they'll say, well, you don't want any regulation. It's not true. You know, let me give you an example. Back at the beginning of the 20th century, when we were building cars in this country in New York City in the early 1900s, there were two automobiles. They ran into each other. Stoplights are not a bad thing. We need some regulations. But it's been such an overreach. And many of you, let me ask, and you can just answer yourself. When you look at what you have left over after you paid your bills, don't you kind of look back now and say, how did I used to be able to do it? How did I used to be able to do it? Let me give you an example. Same thing's been in Pueblo. I think a great example, small example, in the big scheme of things, is out of Palisade, Colorado. Outside of Grand Junction, small town. I've traveled throughout the 3rd District, and at almost every meeting, the overregulation of the EPA has come into question. This is from county commissioners, city councilmen, individual business owners, potato farmers in the San Luis Valley, people trying to lead their lives. Well, in Palisade, Colorado, they stopped measuring parts per million, started measuring parts per billion. Does everybody here want clean water? I do. We all do. We all do. And we need to be able to protect that. But they keep getting more stringent and putting the requirement back on the backs of people that are struggling right now. The base water charge in Palisade, Colorado, if you just have your home, you're allocated X amount of gallons of water per month, and that's your base water charge. The base water charge in Palisade was $18 per month. The EPA came in, new regs, they had to build a brand new plant. Those base water charges now, after building an $18 million plant, are now $39 per month, up from $18. Well, that $240 some odd dollars, that was probably a car payment, part of a mortgage payment, shoes for the kids, a couple dinners out, an opportunity maybe to take the family on a short trip. We're seeing that across the board in terms of regulatory costs. I call it taxation by regulation that we are seeing coming out of Washington, a backdoor tax increase that are stripping hardworking Americans of the resources to be able to provide for their families. Senior citizens that are on fixed incomes right now, finding it harder and having to make choices because of the limited dollars that they are allowed to be able to work with. So those are some of the issues that I see that Congress can directly impact when it gets down to creating jobs and getting the economy going, and obviously our national defense, being able to protect this country because of the threat of terrorism are certainly my top 3.
Congressman, my name is Mark Haig, and my question is a little bit similar and yet vastly different from the previous question. It too asks for 2 or 3 responses from you, but this has more to do with the Constitution of the United States rather than economics and so on. I very much value that freedom that the Constitution provides for us, but I also know we have to defend and protect our Constitution. Can you tell us what you think 2 or 3 of the most significant threats are to our Constitution?
You know, I think when I'm looking at some of the threats that I see, got a Constitution in my pocket. For the first time, I think in history, the House of Representatives, Republicans and Democrats together, we read the Constitution at the beginning of this session. It doesn't hurt. It's a great guiding document for us. But we're seeing an overreach from the federal government that is coming into our individual lives. When we're talking about regulatory policy, we're seeing the impacts on our state level. Here, unfunded federal mandates that are flowing down, that are hurting, again, senior citizens, hurting young families being able, trying to provide for themselves. That is a threat. It's pretty explicit what's in the Constitution. That those that are not explicitly stated are reserved for, those powers not explicitly stated are reserved to the states and to the individuals. The federal government's obligation is to be able to protect us. That's got to be the first and foremost thing. To do things that we as a community, as individuals, even as a state at times, are not going to be able to do. Interstate highway system was a great example of something to where that could be a federal government project. Maybe some of the dams that we need to have built to be able to store some of the precious water, which we need here, particularly in the state of Colorado. But the federal government continues to erode those individual rights. When you just look at your daily lives and some of the constrictions that are now on you from the time that you grew up, I think there's a host of different issues that we could specifically point to. And that's where it's very important to have crowds just like this. Because we live in a representative republic.